Welcome back, everyone. So we just discussed the challenges with eating well. We're now going to look at some common strategies that we use to try to overcome them and examine how effective they actually are. And then we're going to look at some legitimate strategies and solutions. So the biggest thing that most of us try to do to control our eating habits and our weight is diet. So silently, wherever you are listening to this, raise your hand if you've ever been on a diet. And I define diet as any intentional change in eating used to restrict your caloric intake, some type of specific macronutrient, or something that you're eating done for a set period of time, not forever, designed to lower your weight. So if you've ever intentionally altered your eating habits for a specific period of time to lose weight, that's considered a diet. So it might look like keto, it might look like Weight Watchers, it might look like Jenny Craig, but all of them are diets. Okay, so let's look at some of the research. Is dieting the solution to our nutritional woes? The answer, unfortunately, is no. So research shows that 95% of people who go on a diet will regain the weight they lost within 1 to 5 years of finishing the diet. Most people by about a year. So you're really excited, you're going to lose weight, you're going to get in shape, you go on a specific diet, you cut out carbs, you don't eat any sweets, or you do intermittent fasting, and you lose weight and you feel great. And then what happens is that you're back to your normal weight within a couple months or a year or 5 years. And who do you beat up? Yourself. You feel bad. Unfortunately, or fortunately, this is not your fault. It has nothing to do with you and everything to do with dieting and evolution. What we see that's even more troublesome is that 66% of people who diet gain back more weight than they lost. And this puts people on a yo-yo diet spiral where they're constantly trying to restrict foods to lose weight, gaining back more, and then dieting again. And we see that this has tremendous consequences on our metabolism. Our body has no idea that we're on a diet. All it thinks is happening is that we are experiencing starvation. There is a famine out there somewhere and we cannot access food. Your body has no idea that there's a Starbucks on every street corner. So when you diet and you consume fewer calories, your body thinks, uh-oh, food's not available. I need to slow some processes down to save myself. Your body's number one job is survival. So if food's not available for an extended period of time, your body will slow processes down, which ultimately results in a slower metabolism. The other thing that you'll see is that you'll lose not only fat mass, but muscle mass. And as we talked about during our physical activity module, exercise, muscle mass is expensive tissue. So when we're losing muscle mass, we're also burning fewer calories, which leads us to dieting is the single biggest predictor of being overweight or obese in the future. And the more times you diet, the more likely you are to be overweight or obese. Is this coming as a shock to you? Because this was pretty shocking to me when I initially learned it. We're taught that dieting is the way to lose weight, when in fact, dieting is the thing that is making us gain weight over time. And there are a host of factors that are a part of this. Some of them we just touched on. We can split them into psychological, so mental and emotional, and physiological or physical body factors. So a couple of the psychological factors are listed here. One is the Last Supper effect. So if you've ever been on a diet before, think back to the day before you go on that diet. What do? You eat everything. And what happens for people is that oftentimes they go on this diet over and over and over again. Every Monday, they're starting over, and then they're eating a ton on the weekend. My favorite story about this is one of my friends' husbands was planning to give up all sweets for Lent. And this guy has a huge sweet tooth, one of the biggest sweet tooths I've ever seen. So we were visiting these friends and we went out to get burgers. And he knew this was his last night to eat sweets. So he got a burger and fries. He also got a huge milkshake, but that wasn't it. This was his last chance. So he went then to a donut shop and got a giant donut covered in ice cream, because after all, this was his last chance. And what we see for many people is this experience happening over and over and over again. So we think that we're making more nutritious food choices, when in fact, putting ourselves on these diets increases this restrictive mindset that makes us think about and crave these foods even more. So if you've ever been on a diet, you probably notice that you think about food, especially the foods you can't have, all the time. And this is normal. Again, if your body thinks that you're in a famine, thinking more about food is helpful to you. It's going to help you seek it out and eat more to stay alive. This can lead to what we call the restrict binge cycle, where people pull back on their eating and then end up over consuming or binging, eating a ton of food when they do eat. And in fact, this can actually predispose the development of binge eating disorder, which is the most common eating disorder in the United States. This is where people eat large volumes of food in single sittings, often while experiencing a sort of feeling of numbness. And many times this is preceded by previous diets. So there are a lot of psychological factors that cause you to focus in on food, to crave it, to think more about it, and to want to eat even more when you do. There are other physical factors as well. So we already talked about that reduction in your resting metabolic rate, meaning that just to stay alive, you burn fewer calories. You also have less muscle mass. And unfortunately, there's research to show that this persists even after you gain some weight back, because typically the weight that you first gain when you're gaining back on a diet is fat rather than the muscle that you lost. We'll look more at that in a minute. You also see altered hunger and fullness hormones, such that your hormones that control your hunger get ramped up. So ghrelin is one hormone that spikes to make you hungry. This hormone is higher when people are dieting. Leptin is a hormone that spikes to make you full. This hormone is lower when people are dieting. So you can see here, there are a whole host of factors that make dieting problematic long-term. This graph is from a fascinating experiment called the Minnesota Starvation Experiment. And this was done in the 1940s in Minnesota, you guessed it, during the end of World War II. And at the end of World War II, as concentration camps were being liberated, Allied troops were coming and bringing food back to individuals, and they were finding that some of them were getting sick or even dying. So the goal was to semi-starve healthy young men and then refeed them to see the best and healthiest way to bring food to these countries and bring people back to health. So they took college age healthy men, and I won't go into all of the details of the study for sake of time here, but they put them on a semi-starvation diet, a restricted diet for a couple of months. And the really interesting thing is their semi-starvation diet consisted of 1,600 calories per day. And that was half of the calories that these men had been eating prior. Now, most dieters today, 1,600 calories seems like a luxury. So one thing to keep in mind is that this semi-starvation diet wasn't even all that little, and compared to what many dieters do. And what they found is that these men not only became obsessed with food, many of them bought and hoarded cookbooks. There was no Pinterest or Instagram at the time. Dreamed of becoming chefs. Some of them stole food from grocery stores, binged and purged. Some of them even had experiences of episodes of psychosis. They engaged in social isolation. Their schoolwork studied. These men had real physical and mental consequences from this experiment. And when they ended it and refed these men, they found that they ate up to 10,000 calories per day to meet their hunger needs. So these men were so hungry after this semi-starvation for a couple months. And of course, as you would expect, they gained weight. So what you can see here in this slide is their initial drop in body weight and body fat, and then their increase after the 3-month study period. The dark circles are body weight, and the open circles, clear circles, are body fat. And so you see during the study, both body weight and body fat drop extensively. And what you see when they gain their weight back is that their weight shoots up above their baseline levels, and more of the weight that they're gaining is fat compared to muscle. So they've lost both muscle and fat tissue. And as they start refeeding themselves, their body prioritizes gaining fat. Now, why would our bodies do this? We're just trying to be fit and look good when we go to the beach in modern days, not in the Minnesota Starvation Experiment. But this example holds true today. So why would our bodies do this? Our bodies do this because, I will repeat, their number one job is to keep us alive. And so if your body thinks there was a famine and you were starving, the best thing it can do is store extra reserves for the next famine that comes along. So it's going to pack on a bunch of extra fat, because fat is a bunch of good calories that we can use during the next famine. And so you can see then how each successive time somebody diets and cuts calories, when they inevitably start eating more again because of the natural consequences of dieting, their body safely and healthfully stores extra fat to prevent against future famines. And as this continues to occur, weight gain and fat gain in specific increases. And then what do people do when they gain this fat after the diet? Oh no, they freak out and they diet again. So I am not saying that anyone is wrong for doing this. I've certainly engaged in this many times myself until I realized it was a futile pursuit. Dieting is not the answer to our healthy weight goals. Like I said, it can cause us to gain more weight long term and have negative consequences for our health. Weight cycling, or yo-yo weight, is linked to the development of chronic diseases. So what the heck can we do if dieting is not the answer and we know we've got some nutritional challenges? Well, we're going to cover some various answers in this and next lecture. One strategy that you can try is mindful eating. Now, this strategy is awesome because it's so simple, but it's not easy. Simple does not mean easy. It's straightforward, but it's hard to do. Let's explain what it is. So mindfulness is paying attention to your present moment experience without judgment. And this is a strategy used by people who like to engage in meditation. Many of you talked about using mindfulness strategies in your everyday life, and this is actually highly correlated to happiness. So mindful eating is just applying that mindfulness practice to your eating experience. So what sorts of things can you be present to while eating? You can pay attention to your hunger and fullness cues, noting how full or how hungry you are before eating, during eating, and after, how full you are at various points in the meal and after. You can pay attention to your food preferences. When you're hungry, what do you want to eat? Is it light, heavy, cold, hot, crunchy, soft, smooth, salty, umami, sour, sweet? So paying attention to your food preferences will help you figure out what you want to eat over time too. Paying attention to the sensations of eating, the satisfaction of the eating experience is a key component of mindful eating. And lastly, noticing the thoughts and feelings that come up about your eating experience. Just noticing rather than judging. So that is a quick nutshell of mindful eating. So a little bit more about it. There's no right or wrong way to do it. It's just paying attention. And rather than an outcome like a specific weight, a specific number of calories, or a specific type of eating, it's really a practice that you aim to get better at. And it asks you to select foods that are both satisfying and nourishing. So it doesn't totally throw nutritional content out the window. It asks you to select foods that feel good in your belly and your body, that satisfy the hunger you have at the time, that make you comfortably full, and that leave you feeling good after. That's how you know food is more nourishing. So what kind of benefits can we see from mindful eating? Well, some things we see are reduced consumption. When you pay attention, you get fuller sooner and you eat less. Part of that is because you have more satisfaction with the eating experience and an increased satiety or fullness level from the food after eating. We can actually get more nutrient absorption from mindful eating because our digestive system works better when we're paying attention. We can see reduced disordered eating behavior, things like anorexia, bulimia, or binge eating disorder. Those things can be reduced or less likely to occur. And then we'll even see outcomes like improvements in self-efficacy, one's belief in their ability to do something, and in this case, eat well. Improvements in self-esteem, changes in food preference over time, where people start to gravitate towards liking and selecting more nutritious foods. And for some people, all of these things can lead to weight loss and definitely to weight maintenance. So mindful eating asks that you be present when you're eating, that you select foods that sound like they would be appealing at the time, and you think will feel good in your body afterwards. So chips might sound good, but if you really start to pay attention as you're regularly eating, you might feel kind of yucky every time after you eat them. So for me, nut clusters, any kind of nut bar, like a Kind bar or like nut cluster bags that you can get where they're kind of all mixed together. For some reason, I feel super yucky every time I eat those. I don't know what it is in them, but I always get a stomach ache afterwards. So I don't eat those foods. Some foods feel really good in my body and some don't feel as good, but I have to pay attention to figure that out. So let's talk about some specific strategies you can use to start eating more mindfully. One is the hunger scale. So this is a scale of 1 to 10 that goes from super duper hungry to super duper full. Think of it like a gas tank where 1 is empty and 10 is full. 5 is neutral. You're neither hungry or full. So let's define the very end and then where you want to be most of the time. So if you've ever skipped a meal or you've had a really busy shift, you haven't been able to eat in a while, and you are so hungry, you will eat anything someone puts in front of you. You will go to whatever first store you can get to and shove it down your throat. That's a 1. You're starving. You might feel kind of dizzy or faint or nauseous, and you need to get food now. What usually happens when you eat at a 1? Well, oftentimes you overeat. You eat so much so quickly that you end up feeling really full and stuffed, and you make poor nutritional choices because your body's craving high energy foods. Oftentimes, you'll eat until you swing all the way over to the other end of the scale and hit a 10. And 10 is like post-Thanksgiving full. Ugh, where you're so full that you feel bloated and uncomfortable and you couldn't possibly take another bite. Every time I have Thanksgiving with my family, my stepbrothers say, "Oh, I'm never eating again," because they've eaten so much food. It's that kind of feeling. So ideally, we don't want to get to those extremes. When we get all the way down to a 1, our metabolism has actually slowed down a little bit to start to conserve energy. And as we just said, we end up overeating and eating less nutritious foods. Ideally, we want to aim to eat at about a 3. And a 3 means you're noticing sensations of hunger. So your stomach might be growling, or it might feel empty or cavernous. You might notice that it's hard to pay attention to whatever you're doing. You might start to get a little bit irritable or tired. People notice hunger in different ways. You might notice it in physical, mental, or emotional ways that I just listed. So start to pay attention and see how you notice your hunger. And you want to aim to eat at about a 3, where food sounds really good. You could definitely think of something appealing, but you don't need to eat a large volume of food right now or you're gonna pass out. This is going to help you make better food choices, be able to eat more mindfully. Paying attention to hunger is part of mindful eating too, and stop at an appropriate level, all while maintaining your metabolic function. Ideally, you want to aim to stop at about a 7. I know this is slightly uncomfortable here, but like a 6, 7 would be pleasantly full, where you're no longer hungry, and you might notice again physical, mental, and emotional changes. So some physical changes might be a feeling of satisfaction in your stomach, a feeling of calmness that comes over your body, or maybe like a warmth. Mental changes might be you stop thinking about food and you start thinking about the next thing that you're going to do. And emotional changes, again, are usually some sort of feeling of calmness or enjoyableness. You generally don't want to feel pain, aching, bloating, guilt, fatigue. You don't want to feel like you have to take a nap. Using this scale, staying between the 3 and the 7, is going to help you balance your calorie intake and output over time. You have the skills to do this without measuring your calories, as long as you pay attention. This is going to help you get as many calories as you need, the right kind of calories for you over time. So aiming to eat at about a 3 and stop at a 7 whenever possible. I know sometimes we're working and we can't always get food in. Bringing some easy snacks along can help. We'll talk about snacks in our next lecture. But this is probably my favorite how-to food tip. So I talked about adding vegetables last lecture. That's my favorite kind of food content tip. add more vegetables in to get more fiber, vitamins, minerals, and feel fuller without a lot of extra calories or energy. This is my favorite how-to food tip to know when you're actually hungry or when you're eating for reasons other than hunger, and then stopping when you're actually full. Another thing that's a component of mindful eating is actually trying to enjoy the food. I know this sounds like such a silly concept. So much of the time, we're just trying to eat healthy food that we don't think tastes good, or we're just trying to shove it down before we move on to the next thing. I'm so guilty of this myself, especially as a full-time working mom. I get it. But satisfaction in the eating experience actually helps us digest and absorb our food better, eat less food over time, and balance our weight and health. So paying attention to the food helps us trigger our parasympathetic nervous system, that rest and digest nervous system, that sends more blood flow to our digestive system. It increases our stomach acids, which means we digest and absorb more nutrients from our food. We'll naturally take smaller portions and generally eat less over time because we don't need to eat so much to get our brain's attention and enjoy it. How many of you have ever been eating directly from a bag of chips while watching TV and find your hand hitting the bottom, only to feel like you didn't even really enjoy the chips at all? I know I am so guilty of this, and I always want another serving when this happens. So the satisfaction factor asks that you just pay attention and try to enjoy the food. Use your five senses. Notice the tastes, the textures, the smells, the temperature of the food. Notice if it's crunchy or smooth or soft. And a specific way that you can do this is you can set an amount of time that you're willing to dedicate to a meal or a snack. And maybe just start with one a day. I know I can't do all the meals a day, and sometimes I can't even do a full meal or snack. So let's say you're going to do breakfast. Set a timer for 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes. Put your phone out of reach, turn your television off, and just eat and see what comes up. What do you notice in the food that you haven't noticed before? I love hearing feedback from students on this example, and this is actually part of what you'll do in your nutrition assignment this week. You're going to do this for a whole day, but in normal life, you're just going to do as much as you can, even if it's 1 minute or one bite. Remember our tiny habits. Sometimes all you can do is take one full, yummy, focused bite of the food before you've got to move on. I'm going to set that goal for myself. And I have a picture of these milkshakes here because I have another really interesting study to share about with you. So in this study, they asked participants to come in on 2 different dates and gave them a milkshake at each time. On one day, they told them it was a light and fit dieting shake that had 140 calories. On the other day, they told them it was a rich, creamy, decadent shake that had 620 calories. And then they measured their self-reported levels of fullness and satisfaction and their blood ghrelin levels, that hormone that I told you spikes when you're full. Now the catch, both shakes were exactly the same and had 380 calories. So one we think is a light and fit diet shake. The other we think is a creamy, dreamy milkshake. They're both the exact same. What happened? Well, they found that people reported higher levels of fullness and satisfaction with the creamy, delicious, indulgent shake. Okay, so that's in their heads. But they also found that, as you would expect, ghrelin levels dropped with the creamy, delicious shake, but with the light and fit shake, they didn't change at all, meaning that people actually had no physiological response of fullness to the exact same amount of calories. This just blows my mind and is a really awesome example of the mind-body connection that we talked about in the beginning of class. So you can apply the mind-body connection to your food by noticing all the wonder and joyful aspects of it. Enjoy all the flavors, textures, smells, sights, and sounds, and think about the food as nourishing and yummy and healthy to you, and you'll have a better digestive response, feel fuller sooner, and ultimately eat a healthier amount of food for you. Oftentimes, you'll hear the term the French paradox to describe how people eat in France, where they eat a lot of rich foods like croissants and butter and red wine, but they're generally much healthier than people in the United States. And part of the theory is this, that they're paying attention to and enjoying the eating experience. So those are my two best tips for mindful eating. Set a specific amount of time to enjoy a few bites or a few minutes of a meal, and use the hunger and fullness scale as much as possible to eat around a 3 and stop around a 7. Here are some additional resources around mindful and intuitive eating for you. Mindful eating is what we just talked about. Intuitive eating adds a bit more detail around not dieting, accepting all foods, exercising healthfully, the satisfaction factor. There's a 10-step approach that expands on the concept of mindful eating. So we have a full website by psychologist Susan Albers called eatingmindfully.com. Headspace is an app that you can use. There are tons of other apps. Many of you have mentioned them in class to practice mindfulness, and many of them have mindful eating meditations as well. The Slow Down Diet is a wonderful book by Mark David that talks about this concept of eating mindfully and all the benefits of it. And then lastly, one of the books that has personally changed my entire life is Intuitive Eating, a revolutionary program that works, which was originally written in 1992 and is now in its 4th edition, and outlines this process of ditching diets, using your own hunger and fullness and food preference cues to pick what, when, and how much to eat, finding satisfaction in the eating experience, exercising joyfully, and respecting your body. If this is an area of interest for you, I can't recommend it more. They also have a workbook, so you can check that out. Okay, so let's, if my slide will move on, go through our final takeaways and strategies. So our big takeaways from today are, we live in a biology environment mismatch. Our biology is not designed to live in the environment that we do, but here we are. And there are strategies that you can take to help. Dieting does not produce sustainable, healthy changes for our well-being or our weight, and can actually cause real physical, mental, and emotional harm, and causes us to gain weight and makes it more likely that we become overweight or obese long-term. And lastly, how you eat and what you think about your food and how much attention you're giving to the experience impacts how much you eat, what you eat, and your overall health. So some takeaway strategies. As much as possible, set up your environment for success. So put less nutritious foods out of sight, bottom drawers, farther away, or don't bring them in the house at all, and bring the more nutritious foods into the home and out on site. Have a fruit bowl on the counter, pre-chop your veggies when you first get them. This is a strategy that I use a lot of. Again, I'm a busy working mom. When I purchase my groceries, I wash all my produce and chop it up right then and there and put it in containers so it's easy to use throughout the week. Self-monitor, which just means paying attention. So pay attention to your hunger, pay attention to your fullness, pay attention to your eating habits. For some people, this means monitoring weight. For other people, this is not at all helpful and can be quite triggering. So just pay attention. Make realistic habit-based changes. Don't overhaul your diet in a day. Like, I'm adding vegetables to half of every meal moving forward and only eating lean proteins and healthy fats. Pick one meal or snack to make one change to, do it for a week, and then build from there. Consider learning more about mindful or intuitive eating. And as you try it out in your assignment this week, mindful eating, if you like it, try implementing it some more. Again, just one meal or snack a day makes a difference. Consider the concept hara hachibu, which is the Japanese tenet of eating until 80% full. So stop when you're comfortably full, you're not stuffed and painful, and you're ready to move on. And lastly, I always encourage people to use the sustainability check when making any nutritional change. And that is, ask yourself, is what I'm about to do something that I can do forever? If not, it may not be a good strategy for you. So let me give you an example. If you're going to start a specific food diet, like you're getting specific shakes or bars or meal replacements that you're going to do for a set period of time, if it's not something that you can do forever, it's a diet and it's not likely to help you long term. it doesn't really help you if you lose 10 pounds now, only to gain 15 pounds back later. So that's why I suggest making habit-based changes, like add 2 different colored vegetables to your lunches every day. Is that something that you can realistically stick to, despite things coming up and hard times, but that you can plan to stick to forever? Or make sure you have some source of protein in every meal and snack. That's going to help keep you full, stabilize your blood sugar. We'll talk more about that in our next lecture. Pick one thing, use the sustainability check. Can I stick with it forever? If not, pick something else. Keep going until you find one strategy at a time that you can implement that feels good, that you're willing to stick with, and build from there. I hope this has been helpful. Thanks for tuning in, and take care.